This video is part of my Ubisoft Retrospective series where I will be playing through a few of Ubisoft's video game franchises with the intent of seeing not only how the games themselves have changed over the years, but also how the changing business practices of Ubisoft have influenced the overall design philosophies and quality of the games in each series. If you want to know more about all that hoopla, check out the complete mission statement video and the link in the description. Watch Dogs is one of Ubisoft's more recent new IPs, having been released in 2014. The marketing and push for this game were quite tremendous. Ubisoft really believed that they had the next AAA massive hit on their hands. Unfortunately, when the game was actually released, the reception wasn't unanimously positive for reasons that will be explored in the video, although the critical response was still quite favorable. I played Watch Dogs when it first came out on the 360 and found it to be an enjoyable experience, but I haven't played it since that first time. So this was my second playthrough of the game and my first time playing it on a current-gen system, the Xbox One. Watch Dogs Legion, the third game in the franchise, was initially supposed to be released on March 6th of 2020, but after the fiasco of Ghost Recon Breakpoint, it was delayed until sometime this year. So I decided to get ready for its release by knocking out a couple videos on the first two games. Like all the other videos in this retrospective, this will not be spoiler-free. You have been warned. Let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. Watch Dogs 2012 E3 demo was a lie. Almost everything about the demo was downgraded in the actual game, and Ubisoft deserved every bit of backlash and ridicule they got for it. The closest thing I can compare it to was the Anthem E3 demo, although that one was definitely a way bigger lie than the Watch Dogs demo. With that said, the game still looks pretty damn good, especially for a game that was cross-gen with the 360 and PS3. The city of Chicago is very well detailed, with lots of small touches that make the city feel real, like NPCs going about their day and doing various activities like playing basketball. The city has an L train that the player can actually ride on or in, with lots of vehicle types including boats to help breathe diversity into the setting. The weather and daytime to nighttime cycle look great, and character models, at least for the main cast, are highly detailed. The only problem I have with the city is that there really isn't that much variety between the locations you'll get to explore. Or maybe it just doesn't feel like there's much difference between one location and another. There's the downtown area with skyscrapers and concrete everywhere. There's the suburbs with your typical neighborhood houses. There's the poor area, which is run down with lots of buildings in disrepair. And there's Pawnee, which is a little town outside of Chicago in a woodland kind of area. But none of these areas really have much personality, and honestly it all blended together over the course of the game for me in a way that some mediocre open world games tend to do. Mediocre being a word I will return to later. What can't be described as mediocre, however, are the animations, which are stellar. Ubisoft have really been at the forefront when it comes to animations for a very long time, and I honestly think we take for granted and don't give enough credit to how amazing the animations are in all of Ubisoft's games. Fun fact about the animations: the mocap actor that was hired to do the free-running and combat animations in the game for Aiden was actually so athletic that Ubisoft asked him to tone it down, as he was able to do things that the team felt Aiden wouldn't be able to realistically do. Can you imagine being so good at your job that you make the character you're capturing for look bad? There's some pop-in when you're driving around the world, but the game runs very well, with minimal frame rate drops, no crashes, and I think I only had one glitch in the entire game, and that was in the DLC. Fast traveling takes only a couple of seconds to occur, which is really impressive. The score is actually really good, but it doesn't feature very prominently for most of the game. There are a couple of missions in the game where the music is pushed to the forefront, but other than that, when I was just playing the game, I never really noticed the music. When I was listening to the soundtrack on Spotify before writing the script, I didn't recognize most of the songs despite having just played through the game, so maybe the adaptive soundtrack isn't as great of a tool as developers think it is. The sound effects and design are both really well done, and the voice acting is also great. I do have to admit though that Aiden's voice made me laugh for the first couple hours of the game until I got used to it, cause it sounded like Aiden was trying to do a Christian Bale's Batman impression. The game is set in modern day Chicago, which is the world's first smart city in the world of the game. A system called CTOS runs the entire city from the trains to the traffic lights. You play as Aiden Pierce, a hacker who eventually turns vigilante. At the start of the game, Aiden and his partner Damien are thieves and attempt to pull off a job of siphoning bank accounts at an exclusive hotel, the Merlot. The hack goes south when they realize that there's a second hacker trying to track them, and Aiden bails on the job against Damien's wishes. Unbeknownst to Aiden and Damien, the hotel is actually owned by Chicago's biggest mob boss, Lucky Quinn. Quinn believed that Aiden and Damien were attempting to retrieve a blackmail file Quinn had on the mayor of Chicago in order to hit on both of them. While Aiden was driving with his niece and nephew, a couple hitmen rode up beside them and shot out the tires, resulting in a car crash that killed Aiden's niece Lena. So the basic idea of the story is a revenge and mystery plot. Aiden wants to kill the people responsible for the death of his niece and find out why the hit was ordered on him. There are more wrinkles to the story, but honestly, I don't really care. Remember when I said that the word mediocre would be brought up again? Well, here it is. The story is completely mediocre, average, and uninteresting. Before the game came out, I remember being really excited at the prospect of playing as the Fox, which is Aiden's vigilante name. I imagined we would be like a modern-day hacker Batman, even though Batman is already an accomplished hacker, taking down criminal scum in the city of Chicago. And while you do that, it's all in the periphery of a pretty standard and cliched revenge story. All the missions where Aiden is acting like a vigilante who helps people outside of the main plot are side missions. For the first few hours of this game, I was really not into it. It starts off really slow and the story doesn't get going for me until the introduction of T-Bone. Once you get to that part, the story does pick up, but there's still problems with it. I think one of the biggest issues with the plot is how much it's stretched out. There are a few times where things happen seemingly for no other reason than to make the game longer, like the whole default part of the game. It just doesn't need to be in the game. And Aiden goes to Rossi Fremont like 2 or 3 times throughout the game, and I know he says that he can't do it alone because it's like a fortress, but the last time you go there, he does do it alone with no real issues. A lot of people have said that even though they don't like the plot of the game, they do like the characters and think that the characters are done well. I disagree. I think the characters aren't very interesting at all. Or maybe it would be better to say that the writing isn't very interesting. None of the dialogue feels inspired or particularly well written, and that becomes a big issue when you spend so much time listening to characters talk to each other. The setup is there for interesting characters, but the game never capitalizes on it. Clara is revealed to have been the hacker that traced Aiden's signal and got Lena killed. They don't do a single thing with that, as Clara leaves after the reveal, and the next time we see her, she dies. T-Bone, aka Raymond Kenny, was responsible for the deaths of 11 people when he tried to show the vulnerabilities of the system. They never really bring it up either. And Nikki doesn't really act like a human being for the entire game. She lost her daughter, and even after finding out that Aiden is the vigilante and he absolutely had a hand in Lena dying, she never shouts at him, she never gets mad at him, she never even seems bothered that Lena's dead, even when her and Aiden are standing over her grave. Aiden's character, however, is the one potentially bright spot in the game. I say potentially because I'm not sure if they wrote Aiden this way on purpose. Aiden is a hypocrite and a violent criminal. He was a thief before the start of the game, and his actions led to his niece's death. But he never really takes any responsibility for his actions. Even when he becomes the vigilante, he still steals money and cars from innocent people and uses civilians to his advantage regardless of the outcomes for them, with certain hacking opportunities like the traffic lights. Now don't get me wrong, I don't have any issues with playing as an immoral protagonist. I love the GTA series, and none of those games have good people as the player character. But the thing is, GTA understands that its protagonist is an awful person and doesn't pretend like they're not. So here's the thing. If Aiden is written on purpose to be someone who doesn't take responsibility for their actions, someone who is delusional and believes all their actions are justified, then he is written perfectly. There are a few signs that point to this, like how he says he finally feels like he can breathe after killing Quinn, and how he steadfastly refutes Damien, calling him out on his bullshit. The developers did say that Aiden was inspired by Walter White, so it could be the case, but I'm still not convinced given the level of writing quality that's present for every other part of the game, which is not a very high level. And the fact that I have to question it means that they didn't pull it off as well as they wanted to, if they were trying to. The last thing I have to say about the story is that the tone is very inconsistent. We're presented with a dark and gritty story of crime, violence, and revenge. I mean, the game even has a scene where Aiden infiltrates a sex slave auction being held by Lucky Quinn, who's a part of a human trafficking ring. The game desperately wants wants you to take it seriously. But then you take a digital trip and bounce from flower to flower while giggling, or spy on a random civilian who's doing something dumb or zany, and Jordy, oh Jordy. I know a lot of people like Jordy. I don't. Jordy belongs in a different game. Jordy is supposed to be the zany, wacky, off-the-wall criminal who makes you go, "Oh man, what the hell you doing, Jordy? That's so crazy." But it doesn't, because the writing isn't very good, and he severely clashes with the rest of the game. The story is definitely the worst part of the game. Watch Dogs has the holy trinity of open-world design: driving, shooting, and side missions. Unfortunately, none of these things do much to separate themselves from the pack. One of the things you'll hear be consistently criticized about Watch Dogs is its driving. A lot of people don't like it, myself included. Now I'm gonna go on a little bit of a rant, a little bit of a tangent, but why do so many open world games have shitty driving? Specifically shitty high-speed driving. No one is going to play an open world game by driving carefully. No one. I mean, we've all attempted to drive around a GTA game while obeying the rules of the road just to see if we could. And it's fun for a little while, but 99.99% of the time, players are driving as fast as they can because it's fun to go ripping around a city at Mach speed. And game developers have to know this. So why are driving physics so shit at high speed? I understand it's not realistic to be able to control your vehicle super well at high speeds, but honestly, I don't care. I would rather have fun driving in an open world game like Watch Dogs than realistic driving. Leave that to Forza, alright? Eventually you get used to the driving, but the only reason I could really tolerate it was because of the slow-mo mechanic. You can activate a focus mode which slows down time while you're driving or shooting, and it's a lifesaver when it comes to driving. Whenever I needed to make a turn when I was driving full speed, I'd go into focus mode to make the turn. And yeah, it is kinda cool, but I get the feeling that this focus mode was implemented to compensate for lackluster mechanics instead of to enhance them. Same goes for the shooting. Shooting in Watch Dogs is kinda lame. None of the guns feel that good to shoot, and I was never able to find a sensitivity that really felt right or satisfying. It's not terrible, I've played worse, but it's definitely not remarkable. It's also heavily reliant on the very sticky lock-on and focus mode. Now, to be completely fair to Watch Dogs, it's by no means the only open world game with bad driving and lame gunplay. Plenty of open world games suffer from the same problems. But the only thing that separates Watch Dogs from the competition in any meaningful way is the hacking mechanic. But even that has its problems. Hacking in Watch Dogs is limited to two different things, one type of puzzle and the X button. I actually found the hacking puzzle in Watch Dogs to be fairly fun, even though for most of the game it's not really that intricate or challenging. There are a few puzzles near the end of the game though that are a little challenging. The puzzle involves rotating various pathways to let a signal flow through to a specific node, most of the times from multiple sources to unlock that node. It doesn't really represent actual hacking in any way, but it works for the purposes of the game. The actual gameplay hacking is all connected to one button, and you only have one option for each hacking prompt, which is to hack or not to hack. The game calls the hacking tool, which is used through Aiden's phone, the Profiler. Aiden can hack people's phones to steal money or listen in on phone calls or snoop through their texts. He can hack security cameras and travel between them to spy on enemies or wreak havoc on them by hacking things like fuse boxes or enemy grenades to explode while still monitoring them from the camera. Aiden can also hack while driving. He can hack traffic lights to create a car accident to impede enemy vehicles. He can burst steam pipes underneath roads to take down an enemy vehicle, and he can hack road spikes and blockers to incapacitate enemies and vehicles, among other things. The hacking is especially useful while in stealth, and there's quite a few encounters where I was able to take down a sizable amount of enemies while only using the hacking mechanics without ever even moving Aiden. And Aiden also has hacking items that need to be crafted or bought that he can use, such as the CTOS scan, which reveals all enemy locations in the vicinity, the lure, which will attract enemies to the position it was thrown, and the blackout, which is probably the coolest hack in the game, as it triggers a complete blackout in the city, making all the lights for every building go out and giving you the perfect opportunity to slip by enemies unnoticed. Most of the hacks in the game need to be unlocked through the game's upgrade system, so you won't have all of them at your disposal from the start. The upgrade system has a few trees that also improve things like your shooting, your focus mode, your driving, etc. It's a pretty standard affair. There are two main issues I have with the hacking, however. however. The first is that it's not very deep. It's usually just one button press and then the thing happens, whatever it is. The most interesting things you can do with the system are using a lure to bring a guard over to an explosive hack and detonate it, or hacking a gate behind you so that the police can't follow you, and using a blackout so the gate won't be opened. Imagine, for instance, you could hack a water pipe so that it spills water on the floor. Then you lure a guard over with the lure, then detonate a fuse box and electrocute him. Then when another guard comes to see what's going on, you could distract him by calling his phone while you hack the grenade on the dead guard's belt to explode. That sounds like a cool, deep hacking chain of events that just never happens in game. The second issue I have with it is that it makes a lot of the encounters in the game really easy, particularly if you're playing stealth. You can wreak havoc on a whole group of guards without any of them knowing where you are, then you can walk right in and take out the stragglers with your silenced pistol or melee takedowns. Don't get me wrong, it is fun and satisfying, but I found myself using the hacking prompts less frequently the further into the game I got, as it just wasn't very engaging anymore, which is something that more complexity and depth to the system could have added. Watch Dogs does have a sort of parkour system in place which allows Aiden to maneuver over obstacles quickly and climb certain parts of buildings. It's more fleshed out and fluid than your average open world game, but it's nowhere near as important or useful to the game as, say, Assassin's Creed's freerunning system is. The game has a reputation system that keeps track of how you play the game. If you run over pedestrians all the time while driving or shoot cops, then you'll get a negative reputation and public opinion will turn against you. This will result in people occasionally calling the police if they see you. And if you play the game carefully and resolve crimes and side missions in a non-lethal, non-destructive way, you'll gain a good reputation and people will be less likely to call the cops on you. This system doesn't really affect the game in any meaningful way though, as it's quite easy to stop civilians from calling the police if you have a negative reputation. And there aren't any story events that change depending on your reputation level. Now when it comes to missions, Watch Dogs gives the player a surprising amount of freedom with how they want to approach each mission, whether it's a side or main mission. You usually can choose whether to go in guns blazing or use stealth with or without the use of hacking. It was actually refreshing to play an open world game that doesn't force you to play a mission exactly the way it wants you to. This open-ended design is one of the game's strongest aspects. The missions themselves, however, aren't usually that interesting. Most of them are just some variation of kill this guy or hack this thing. Two things you'll get pretty sick of doing if you play the side missions for any amount of time. There are a few main missions that tweak the formula, and these are definite highlights of the game. There's a few missions where Aiden needs to guide a character out of harm's way while they're surrounded by enemies, and the game strongly encourages you to use the cameras and hacking system to do it. But I think for most of them you can still just go in yourself and deal with it that way. Again, the open-ended mission design is really welcome here, and I really gotta give props to Ubisoft for that. Probably my favorite missions were two instances in the game where another character has managed to hack into the CTOS system and is using it against the player the same way the player has been using it the whole game. Trying to drive through the city to your objective while all the bridges are going up, the traffic lights are being triggered, and steam pipes explode underneath you all out of your control is pretty damn exhilarating. The only notable exceptions mission-wise are the AR games and the digital trips. AR games are just little mini-games you can start at certain points on the map. There are two different kinds of AR games, Cash Run and Invasion. Cash Run is just an obstacle course where you need to avoid the red markers and pick up coins, and Invasion is basically like a shooting challenge where you need to shoot the aliens as they exit the portal. Neither of these AR games are particularly interesting, but I do appreciate how they fit into the themes of technology in the game. The digital trips are pretty damn cool though. You can activate a digital trip at any point in game and can select one of 4 to play. The 4 digital trips are Alone, Psychedelic, Madness, and Spider Tank. The digital trips don't really make any real sense in terms of the world that's been set up, but whatever. Psychedelic is by far the worst of the 4, as all it entails is bouncing from flower to flower across the map. That's it. It's honestly pretty lame and is the only one out of the 4 that doesn't have a separate skill tree. Actually, there's one more digital trip called Conspiracy, but it's a paid DLC and I didn't buy it. In Madness, you operate a hellish vehicle and run down as many demons as you can to advance through the levels of the trip. Spider Tank sees you operating the titular Spider Tank and lets you go ham on the world of Chicago. You can also jump and climb buildings relatively high and fast, so jumping across the world, laying waste wherever you go is very entertaining. My favorite of the trips though is Alone, which is a stealth-based trip where the map is infested with robots and Chicago has gone dark. Your objective is to reach a generator and turn it on to bring back power and light to that part of the city. The reason why I like this mode so much is because of the atmosphere. Like it's some genuinely creepy imagery of humanoid figures walking around with flashlights for heads coming after you in a dark and empty city. Multiplayer was one of the parts of the game that Ubisoft was advertising as being unique and innovative, and at the time it definitely was. The thing is though, I never played Watch Dogs multiplayer back in the day, and it doesn't seem like anyone's playing it nowadays, at least not on Xbox One. I was able to get into one online race and do one hacking event, but they both might have been bots as they both didn't really act like a real player would. I also can never seem to connect to the Ubisoft servers, but I can't find any information about them being shut down, so I don't know what was going on there. The main single-player DLC for Watch Dogs is called Bad Blood, and is set after the end of the main game. You play as T-Bone in the DLC, who is attempting to help Tobias Frewer, who is being hunted down by Fixers. As we continue through the story, we learn that the Fixers were only interested in Tobias as a means of luring out T-Bone, and that the Fixers were working for Default, who has a personal vendetta against T-Bone, as Default's brother was one of the people killed when T-Bone triggered the blackout in 2003. I actually like the DLC story more than the main game story. T-Bone is a more likable character for me than Aiden is, and watching him try to make up for what he's done and put it behind him was compelling. The only part of the story that strikes me as bizarre is that I actually killed Default in my playthrough of the main game. I guess Ubisoft assumed that most people would let him get away, but I didn't, so seeing him return here was a little weird. I don't know why Ubisoft didn't just make it so that we can't kill Default in the main game for story reasons, but maybe they just didn't think that far ahead. The DLC adds a few new elements to the game, two of which ended up making their way into Watch Dogs 2. Eugene is a remote-controlled RC car which can go through vents and holes in walls to hack doors or stun guards, and there are now a few puzzles which take place in the game world, allowing you to solve them through the player character as opposed to bringing you to a separate screen. Both of these things are expanded upon in the sequel. Street sweeps are new online and offline side missions which sees T-Bone wiping out street gangs for a contact he has in the police. The servers are all offline for the DLC, so I didn't get to experience the multiplayer portion. These missions don't really add anything different to the game and are more or less the same kind of side missions from the main game. The game doesn't have any microtransactions, but it does have an $18 season pass. The Bad Blood DLC is $15 by itself, so it would be the better deal to get the season pass, but since I had no interest whatsoever in the other DLC, I decided to save $3 and just get Bad Blood. Watch Dogs was released with 6 editions: the Standard Edition, the Special Edition, the DedSec Edition, the Vigilante Edition, the Uplay Exclusive Edition, and the Uplay Digital Deluxe Edition. The biggest thing to talk about in this section is the way Ubisoft tried to sell the game based off of misrepresentation of what the final product was going to look like. Watching the E3 demo makes the game seem more impressive than it is, and while the finished product has almost all the elements that were shown off in the demo, it has been noticeably downgraded from said demo, and Ubisoft knew exactly what they were doing as they had a review embargo on the game that lifted on the game's release date, meaning people couldn't be forewarned of the deception. That is some grade A publisher bullshit right there. The thing you gotta understand about Watch Dogs is that it's not a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that it doesn't really have any distinguishing features except for the hacking mechanic. Almost everything in the game ranges from below average to competent, but it doesn't really excel at any one thing. Certain things like the open-ended design for missions or hacking are fun, but I wouldn't recommend someone play the game just for that. Games are complicated things to get right, and there are a lot of moving parts, and some games come together really well as a complete package, and there's a nice synergy between all the gears turning in the machine. But Watch Dogs never really comes together for me in that way. I was genuinely struggling to get through the first few hours of the game because of the mediocre story and unremarkable gameplay. It did finally click a little bit for me around the third act of the game, but it shouldn't take over 6 hours for a game to connect with the player. And even when it did connect, it still wasn't like I was in love with the game or anything. If I wasn't doing this retrospective, I definitely would have stopped playing it. Still, I didn't hate my time with the game, but I don't think I will ever replay it. I'm gonna give Watch Dogs a 6.5 out of 10. First Watch Dogs game in the bag, and the second one is on the way. I gotta tell you, playing through this game really hurt my excitement for Watch Dogs Legion, but I have started playing through the second game and I am liking it more than the first one. I'm not finished playing it though, so it still might screw it up. If you liked this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and leave a comment about what you think of Watch Dogs. Thanks for watching.